Tallboys and Trackmasters is brought to you by Expert Exhaust. Expect more for your money. And by Cycle Mart, your motorcycle parts store. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 34 of Tallboys
and Trackmasters.
How was your weekend, buddy?
As good as it could be given the weather.
Yeah, it was kind of crappy out, wasn't it?
Definitely felt like October in West Virginia last weekend.
Yeah, but now it feels like it's May again. It's 75 the rest of the week. So.
Yep. Capitalize on it if you can. This will probably be the last nice weekend for about 4 months.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, that time of year.
Yep. Well, we got a very interesting episode tonight, I would say. We're going to talk about Dualsport conversions, and we got a special guest with us tonight, one of the godfathers of converting some bikes to from street use to dirt use, which is one of the topics we're going to be talking about tonight. So please welcome to the show my dad, Bill Wright.
Hi, guys.
What's up? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's dive into this. So I think the first thing to remember whenever you're going to attempt to do something like this is that it's going to be a compromise. It's not going to be the be all end all. You're going to have to put up with some negatives along the way. But I mean, I think there's something to be said about, especially like in Dad's case there, where if you got an old street bike laying around that's not being used anymore, why not give it repurpose and a new life and have some adventures on it? The first thing I want to talk about is converting a street bike into something that's a little bit more adventure friendly. So I think one of the first things that we need to discuss with this is, obviously a street bike's not going to have the necessary suspension to kind of not bottom out and destroy your oil pan and what have you out there on the trail. So let's talk about some really quick and down and dirty suspension modifications. And Dad, why don't you start out with some of the stuff you did on that GS that you got?
Well, on the GS, I did a little disassembly on the front forks first and found out that there was actually quite a bit of room to shim the springs. Did some new seals, and, it calls for like 10 weight oil in the forks. So I kind of rolled the dice and went up to 20 weight with my shim springs, and it actually worked pretty well, but those are also air assist forks, and I found out through a little experimentation with those mods and running about 18 to 20 PSI of air, they actually work a whole lot better than you would ever expect them to.
That's surprising.
They actually soak up, square edge bumps and stuff like that pretty well. And on the rear, I used the famous RFY, eBay and Amazon shocks that, a lot of people say that they don't like them. They don't work. They're like, like a pogo stick. But I believe that a lot of those folks didn't read all the instructions, because those shocks do not come charged with nitrogen. And after charging those with like 75 PSI of nitrogen, and I got the ones that were a little longer than my stock shocks, And I got, with that heavy bike, I got like the stiffest spring rate that I could get. And again, just got lucky because it it works really well.
Yeah. I know.
And you know, those shocks, when I bought them, you know, it's less than $80 for a pair. So you know, it's it's kind of a no brainer.
Yeah, I know. One of the other rear shocks that's kind of very popular to be swapping into stuff is the Yamaha R1 shock from around the 2007 2008 range.
Yes, on a lot of the newer single shock adventure tours and things of that nature, they fit without much modification at all.
Yeah, I know my Versus 650. That's a shock that damn near bolts in, and you know it's fully adjustable, rebound and compression. It has a separate gas reservoir, so it's a good shock, and it'll handle some abuse. You know, I mean, even still though, with as much suspension mods as you can possibly do, it's a street bike's never going to be a dirt bike unless you're full on swapping the complete suspension assemblies, say like the entire front chassis, front forks, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know me and you have a little experience doing that with that CBR 600 I had for a while. We
yes, we do
on that thing. So, and I did want to share something really quickly. The bearing company All Balls, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, that's been around the motorcycle industry. You know, they make wheel bearings, steering stem bearings, what have you, everything you can think of bearing wise. They actually have a website that is dedicated to showing you conversion bearings. And what this does is it will allow you to see if you could put in, say you have a certain size steering stem on your front forks, and there may be a set of forks out there that has the same inner diameter or maybe the same outer diameter, where you could very quickly put some bearing kit together to swap an entire front end on your street bike to make it a lot easier to be more dirt oriented. And I'm going to share that little link right here right now. So yeah, allballsracing.com fork conversion. And that's a really
I've looked at that, and it's amazing. It's amazing how many different interchanges there are on there. You would never imagine until you look at it.
Yeah, it is crazy because, I mean, in all reality, once you start going through that list, there's only maybe 20 to 30 different bearing sizes that were used between pretty much any kind of, I'd say, early Japanese old school street bike, and some of the dirt stuff around that same vintage. And yeah, you can really quickly get lost into that thing and figure out what kind of forks are going to be able to swap.
I won't say that you can swap any front end onto any bike, but it's pretty close with what they have available.
Yeah, and it's also nice just even if you have, say a normal Dualsport, say like, the guys that have CRF 300s or 250Ls that may be looking for something that's a little bit more friendly in the suspension department. And I'm sure there's some kind of forks out there. Yeah, something that's easy on there. Let's talk about the next kind of big issue when you have a street bike and you're trying to convert it to off-road, and that's your tires. Obviously, street tires aren't going to cut it, so you got to do something to get yourself a little bit more girth and a little bit more knobby out there on the back and the front end. And we talked about it before on this episode, on this podcast, that the tire choices that are out there these days are just, it's crazy how many different sizes and different kinds of styles you can get. And they make knobbies, clear up to like a 180 width now, which is insane. So there's some awesome choices out there as far as getting something on your street bike. I know, just for me personally, I got this Versus 650 sitting here beside me, which a lot of the stuff we're talking about in this episode pertains to it. And right now, I've got a set of Kenda Big Block Kenda tire on the back in I think it's a 150 rear. And then on the front, which is something else I want to get into, the fronts on a lot of these street bikes are the same as the back. They're same size. They're 17-inch. And when you have that setup off-road, it doesn't work very well. You can't really get up out of ruts. It wants to just follow the rut. It's
absolutely,
but it's not very good off-road. It just doesn't have that rolling diameter to get over top of obstacles. And one really kind of cool trick that you can do is to run a huge profile front tire, and it kind of emulates a 19-inch front wheel to help out a little bit with that. So I have a 130/80 17 front tire on this thing. So it's kind of goofy to look at from the front. It just looks like it's not meant to be on there, but it definitely helps. What kind of tires you got on the GS, Dan?
Well, when I first built it, was using, of course, Trackmaster, the one and only Trackmaster, and I was able to use it has a 17 rear, so 130, 130 17 rear, but it has a 19-inch front. So the first front tire that I used was actually a 120. It was a 120 18 rear Trackmaster, and kind of the same. They got a little extra height that way, and it did really well. But it wasn't until I ended up, I wore it down and I changed it to a 110, changed it to a 110 100. That's the perfect size for that bike.
Yeah.
Not only does it handle well on road, but off road, it'll cut into the gravel like you need it to and not float around on.
Quite as bad.
It actually, and another thing too, when you're running those on a heavier bike, of course, you got to run a little more pressure than what we usually run. And for some reason on that bike, it seems like it makes the Trackmasters wear a lot better. You don't get near the cupping on the front and all that. And, that's got a twin disc front brake that I'm kind of lazy with. I use it a lot, so I don't have to pick my foot up and use the rear. But it works pretty well.
Obviously there's some other things to go into. Obviously if you got a street bike, a lot of times the foot peg and shifter and brake setup really aren't conducive to standing up and being off road. So
yep. I need to address all that.
That goes for overall ergonomics. I've seen your body positioning on your Versus and everything, and you can kind of fight that with some bar risers or the rocks risers that allow you to pivot, back instead of just tilting your bars. And you might luck out and find some foot pegs that can swap over that have a lower height or something like that. But, a lot of these street bike conversions, you're still stuck with most of the ergonomics of the street bike at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was able to use a set of DR650 foot pegs on my Versus and lower them about 1.5 inches. And the shifter I ended up kind of cobbing together and welding a moose steel shifter on there that gave me a little bit more foot room. So yeah, I would agree with that. It's 10 times better than it was, but it's nowhere close to being like a normal Dualsport. And I think that kind of goes back to your, we're talking about how you're going to have to compromise.
Yep.
But I mean, there's something to be said about having some ingenuity and like Dad did, kind of rescuing a bike that's just reserved to a fate of rusting away in a building or a garage, and it's not that expensive to do these things. If you have a little bit of mechanical know-how and some ingenuity, you can really come up with some cool stuff. And like, I know you don't hardly have any money in that GS you got either, Dad.
I kept track pretty well of every penny just to see actually how economically you could do this. And I'm talking purchase price of the bike right down to the paint, the tires, everything that I did to it. I kept track of it, and it was just shy of $1,200 altogether.
Yeah,
and you cannot have that much fun for $1,200 on a bike.
Everybody loves a bike build too. That's one of the most fun things to do, is to be able to work on something that you're mostly worried about the mechanical side of and not so much the aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Two other things that I'd like to touch on before we kind of get to the next part of this deal is, especially with this new middleweight adventure bike segment that we have that's just absolutely exploding out there.
Mm-hmm.
99% of those bikes are based on a street bike. So a lot of times you can find that street bike version of that bike for next to nothing.
Yep.
You still have the overall frame and engine is kind of the same as the other bike, but it's easy to start with that and kind of put the more dirt oriented things on the bike. Like take Jake the Garden Snake, the YouTube guy there, for example.
MT-07.
MT-07, that's basically like a
Yeah.
10er right now. Like, you know, my Versus 650, you know, is kind of a sport tourer, so it has a little bit taller suspension than the Ninja, but it's basically just a Ninja 650. But all the stuff off of the Versus will bolt right on that Ninja frame. And the last thing I'd like to touch on too is, you know, one of the really most comprehensive and cataloged encyclopedias, I guess I would call it, of conversions on these types of bikes. If you're looking to do that and get some ideas in your head of what's accomplishable, go on Adventure Rider.
Yep.
There is a sub forum down there called Some Assembly Required. And if you click on that, it is nothing dual sport and adventure conversions on some off the wall crazy bikes you wouldn't even think of. Like, I've seen a lot of Harley Sportsters that have been converted off road that look phenomenal, that I would definitely throw a leg over and give a try.
So when I was down in Las Vegas for work earlier in March, I was lucky enough that the Mint 400 was kicking off that week. And I got to see a couple of those Sportster conversions. They were actually on a race in the Mint. And I'd love to throw a leg over one too. The way they had them set up was pretty interesting. One had, I think, RM front forks on it or something like that. And still had the twin shocks in the rear, but long travel. And it was a really interesting setup.
Yep. And just kind of speaking of the same as the YouTube thing I talked about earlier, look at what the guys from Rocky Mountain did with their $1,500 challenge. You know, there was everything from Kawasaki 440 street bikes to Ninja 250s. Like, you got to kind of have that Gambler 500 mindset when you do this type of stuff. I mean, anything's a dual sport if you try hard enough, honestly.
It all depends on your enthusiasm level.
Yeah, you know, and before we get off this subject here, you know, obviously you're not really going to have the ground clearance to be able to bomb trails like, say, Canaan Loop wide open. I mean, I've done it on the Versus, but you got to pick your lines and choose carefully, because a lot of times you got a low hanging oil sump. But at the same time, you know, you still have, for the most part, a motor that was designed to go lots of miles on the highway, and a little bit of off-road and gravel riding is not going to hurt those engines at all. So if anything, coming from the street side of it to the dirt side of it, I think makes a more reliable engine and a more reliable package than, say, going from a dirt bike to converting it to straight street.
Yeah. That's like my 1000 engine. You can just lope along in low gear all day long if you want to. It does not mind a bit. Puts out buckets of torque. You know, it does its thing. Then when you hit the highway, you know, you can run 80 mile an hour in second gear if you want to, and it's smooth. So, you know, it is a compromise, but I like it.
It is cool to be able to say that you put that together and you accomplished riding that trail on that, and you probably shouldn't have ever had a bike like that on that. But, you know,
that makes it even more fun.
That's all over. You see, you know, reports of guys, you know, riding Harleys all the way up to the top of Alaska and all these awesome, you know, adventures out there. And I mean, adventure is a subjective term, but, you know, even just throwing some 50-50 tires on a street bike, you can go have some fun. I see Usa crotch rockets with knobbies on it and guys out there just having a blast. What's the one YouTube channel you watch all the time that has a Sea Boys TV?
Yeah, there's Sea Boys, and then Grind Hard, of course. I
watch Grind Hard.
So those guys, I know
but Sea Boys, they're famous for their R1 and R6 shenanigans.
What was it? Stump Freaks team on YouTube's the one that did the 1000cc dirt bike.
Yeah,
that thing was wild.
Yeah, there's something to be said about being able to ride, you know, a street bike that was never meant to do that type of work, and it's very satisfying. And like I said, at the end of the day, it's an overall package that you're not going to hurt as long as you have maybe some crash protection on there and something to cover up your oil sump and whatnot.
It was funny that you mentioned the oil sump and kind of the sister to that, the low slung exhaust. that's true of a lot of mid-size adventure bikes now. The new Honda Transalp has an oil sump that sticks down like 3 inches below the bottom of the engine case. I think KT90 has a low slung oil sump, so that's not something that hasn't been negotiated by the big brands when it comes to their actual adventure offerings.
I was watching a video about the new Transalp. I think it was I can't remember the dude's name, but that Big Rock Moto. He does like all kinds of different reviews and stuff. And I kept seeing on the low slung exhaust, it looked like a tab that was sticking up like this far, and it was sticking out at an angle, like way out of in the middle of everything there. And I was like, what the hell is that? I look, it's a cover and a guard for the oxygen sensor.
Yep.
The thing was definitely just robbed off of a Honda Hornet 750 and never even thought of maybe going this way with that. Well, I think that kind of covers mostly the street to dirt conversion. So let's go on the other token of that, and like a full-on dirt bike and converting it to the street. Now, obviously, you're going to get all the perks of a dirt bike, which is going to be, full travel suspension, definitely a lot lighter and easier to throw around. But again, the word we're going to come back to, I think, is compromise, because a lot of times bikes, the gear ratios are super short. It's like very close ratio, 5-speed.
Yeah, 5-speed, exactly.
Yeah, it was designed for close course competition. So you're going to get into a point to, gearing is going to be probably one of the first things you need to address whenever you're trying to get a dirt bike to ride on the street. And unfortunately, with the way that the gear ratios are in those bikes, it seems like you're always either first gear is going to be too low or too high, and then you're redlining at 50 miles an hour on the highway. So there's a lot
of Z400s out of this.
Yeah, I won't mention that.
Well, yeah, that is what happens. If you gear to make it comfortable for the engine on the asphalt, then your off-road suffers. And you have to figure out where your sweet spot is and what you're willing to trade away to get what you really want.
Yeah. So I know, one of the most probably converted bikes from dirt to street is one that I own, which is the XR650R. And I had the same issue with it. If you set that thing up to where it was super comfortable at a high rate of speed, first gear felt like you were trying to take off in second. So a lot of the tight technical stuff, you were smoking the clutch and getting the bike way too hot to try to do that. And I kind of just live with the fact of gearing it to the point to where it was kind of okay-ish at both of those. It would still do a high rate of speed decently, and I still had enough bottom end torque out of first gear to get through some of that tight technical single track stuff, which that bike was never designed to do that. It was made for wide open
deserts.
So, yeah, there's a compromise there.
Tell us about two of the biggest pitfalls that I observed your experience with that bike, which was A, the kickstart, and B, the lack of a subframe.
Yeah, that's an issue with a lot of dirt bikes. They were never designed to carry a lot of extra weight or bags. And, I had I wouldn't recommend it, but it was a Nomad rack on the back of that XR, which bolted to the subframe. And I use that term loosely on that XR because it was just designed to hold your butt up on the back of the seat. And, you had that rack on there, and it seemed like no matter what, the subframe bolts, the seat bolts were loosening up every time you tried to put even like one of those little tiny Harbor Freight boxes on the back of it. So I ended up going with a set of soft bags, which was a lot better. But yeah, it's not really designed to do what you're intending to do, and you're going to have some consequences because of that. The Kickstarter deal, yeah, it sucked. Once you figured out the routine and the order of operations to get the thing to fire up, it was okay. But it reared its ugly head at the worst possible time. If you flipped it up on the hill climb, if you laid it over in a mud hole, if you flooded the thing out, doing our normal type of riding, you were there for a while and you were kicking your guts out. And unfortunately, one time there at Mark Wolf's, I think it was the second year we did the 304 detour, I was trying to kick that thing over after going up around the pond in that rock garden section. And the splines had kind of wore a little bit on that kicker, and the thing slipped. And I basically punted the back of my foot peg as hard as I could with my shin. And I thought I broke my leg. It hurt so bad.
I have the picture of that somewhere, and it's black, blue, and green. And I thought you'd fractured something too. I mean, it was a sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I decided one year that it would be a good idea to race my XL 600R at the Dave Coombs Vet Homecoming in the vintage class in the hare scramble, which, I'd raced it before in hare scrambles and it was fine. Well, it ended up being very muddy that day. And if you did anything ham-fisted with that, you would get it to stall. And of course, I got it to stall, and I was trying to kick that thing with a muddy boot out there. Same situation as your 650. You have to do the exact same starting drill. And I remember there was a guy on an old CR 500 leading the class, and I would pass him, and then I would end up stalling the bike, and I would kick it and watch him go by and finally get it started. And then it would take me 2 miles to catch him again. And by the time it was all over, he was still in front of me. If I'd had an E-start, well, if I'd had an E-start, I wouldn't have been in the vintage class.
Yeah.
But the E-start really does make a huge difference in the nasty stuff.
Yeah, it really does. Kind of going along with the E-start, that's another thing we can touch on real quick here with the dirt bikes is they were never designed to have lights on them. It had just enough juice coming off the stator to run the CDI box. So
yeah, that's it.
When you're talking about trying to run on the street, I mean, obviously you're going to want some type of headlight, tail light, turn signal combo setup. And a lot of times these dirt bikes just don't have enough juice coming off that stator to power that stuff. And then you get into the simple fact of, what type of voltage is a dirt bike? Well, it's AC power. So it's not really designed to run, DC.
Yeah, you start getting the rectifiers and everything else for your charging system. And
And you need a bigger stator, a regulator rectifier, some sort of battery, wiring system.
Which the battery options are better than they've ever been with the lithium, like the Shore Eye. I think Tusk came out with their own lithium line. You can mount them in any orientation, upside down, sideways, anywhere you can stuff one of those things on a bike. You can
and see that's the other issue is you run into the fact of a dirt bike only has so much room on it. And like my XR 650R, I had a Ricky 200 watt stator on it, run into a regulator rectifier, go into a battery. And then I had a little fuse panel for all the different stuff that I had on that thing. And I ran out of real estate, man. There was nowhere else on that bike to stuff that stuff. And one of my biggest pet peeves is wiring and crap that just runs nonchalant everywhere. And there's just not a good way to route that stuff on that bike. So you run into, now you're going to have exposed wires. You're going to have, a regulator rectifier or a battery that maybe there's not a good way to mount it solid. So it's going to be moving, and then you're going to,
you can't mount it out of the way of everything like mud, water, etc.
Yeah.
I believe Tusk still does have their total loss system that you recharge and all that. But from my experience, the battery never lasts as long as they claim that it will last.
I had that set up on my XR, and it was good, but it seemed like if you started out the day, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're doing our normal 200-ish miles for a day, there was multiple times where I'm coming back home around 6, 7 o'clock at night, maybe about this time of year where it gets dark early, and you're going through town, and then boop, lights, you've lost all the juice off your battery. So, it's one of those deals where you have to keep that in mind. I was able to kind of cut off the recharge wires off of that battery and wire that into my regulator rectifier, so it was constantly recharging that little Tusk battery. But you're getting into some janky wiring that you have to do to make it work, and it just simply, like I said, it wasn't designed to do that, and it's a compromise.
Yep, that's why. The KTM EXC line draws so many customers now, because it's about the closest you can get to a factory plated dirt bike that's already got, all the wiring done for the blinkers, the headlight, charging system, etc.
Yep. And, it's really nice to be able to like take Nick Hall's 500 XCW, for example. You know, you're able to homologate an EXC wiring harness onto that bike very easily and make it street legal. So that is one good thing about the KTM line. And yeah, I'm sure like the betas and some of the other Euro bikes are the same way, that if they offer a Dualsport version, it's not that hard to take that stuff and put it onto the dirt only model. Let's talk about another kind of issue with the dirt bikes is oil capacity. The thing is a high strung machine. It was meant to be raced hard, then probably change the oil when you're done. And when you're constantly revving the crap out of something on the street for long periods of time, that oil is going to go away very quickly. So that's definitely something you need to look out for on that.
Yep, I agree. Especially if you're running, a more motocross oriented bike that doesn't come with a auxiliary fan or anything like that, even if you're not boiling over on the trails, your engine's still running a little bit past optimum operating temperature. It's going to degrade your oil significantly faster.
Yeah, the capacity is so small on some of those bikes, and the reason why it's intended to be changed every couple hours.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going out for an 8-hour ride, are you going to change your oil 4 times out on the highway? No, you're not.
And to that same tune as you're adopting that bike's maintenance intervals. So if you end up with a bike that's got, the hard coated titanium valves that, yeah, they're lighter, but once that hard coat wears through, they cup and wear into the head like crazy. And that's just what you're stuck with. You're going to be doing your valve adjustments pretty often, way more often than you would on a more street oriented, like detuned bike, like the EXC range or similar.
Yeah, slightly lower compression and different cam profiles, and not nearly as aggressive.
Yep, agreed.
Now the last thing I want to touch on, because we do see this a good bit, and we're starting to see, and I think we talked about this in an early episode, how the term dual sport, the sport itself, seems to be transitioning more to the hardcore side.
Yeah,
you're seeing a lot of 2-strokes now out there on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Be it the Huskies, the gases, the KTMs, and several others. And that's a very big compromise in my eyes, is trying to deal with riding a 2-stroke on the street.
Yep. For any distance, really. Yeah. Outside of just hopping on for 1 to 2 miles between trails or something like that, as well as I do, 2-strokes just aren't happy at like sustained high revs. And that's exactly what you're getting into, trying to do 55, 60 miles an hour for 10, 15 minutes at a time.
You guys remember we had 2 of them on the Easy Loop this year. They made it no problem, but would I have done that? No, I don't think I would have, but to each his own. Whatever you want.
Yeah, it obviously a 2-stroke is going to have a lot more vibration throughout the chassis, and when you're on the highway, you're going to feel that way more prevalent than you would if you're off road. So it's going to fatigue your body a lot faster, and just overall not be as enjoyable, I think. And then the other token of that is your gas situation. Is your bike oil injected where you can just put straight gas in it?
Yeah.
You have to carry a ratio cup with you and constantly mixing gas while you're out there.
Yep.
Obviously,
both of the ones that were with us, I went with them when they went to get gas, and they were oil injected, so it wasn't too big a deal. They just they used twice as much gas as we did, but
yeah, obviously the 2-stroke's going to use a lot more fuel, so you're going to have to plan your stops out accordingly.
Yep. Yeah,
it is something neat to see though, like from a distance. I don't know if I would do it personally, but like I remember when Mike Heston got his KTM 300 street legal, and you see that nice West Virginia motorcycle plate on the back of that thing on the high level bridge in downtown Fairmont. It is cool. Like you said, the people that were on the betas with us on the Easy Loop, it was kind of funny going through Parsons, and you can smell the 2-stroke right behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, to each their own, but to me, that is a huge compromise. If you're going to make a two-stroke, you're dedicated dual sport.
Yeah. Even as close as a lot of local trails are to each other here, I still wouldn't have interest in trying to do a street legal dual sport because, inevitably you're going to end up on 10, 20 mile stretches of pavement or something like that. And that's just so far on not being the deal.
Not for me.
Yeah, I think, it's probably area specific too. If you're out west in the big open deserts and what have you,
Yep.
yeah, it's probably not as bad being able to ride through the desert, the high country, and hop on the highway for a mile and a half to get across to the next side of that terrain.
Yeah.
But like I said, around here, they're going through so many towns and having to do 15, 20 mile stretches to get to the next trail. Yeah, I think I'd be so miserable and PO'd by the time I got to the trail, I wouldn't be able to enjoy it.
Not fun.
And you get home at the end of the day and you're ready to take your wet boots off and all that stuff. Nope, it's time to do a top end.
Yeah, that's the other issue.
If we want to ride tomorrow, we got to replace these rings.
Yeah.
Well, I think probably one of the most important aspects of no matter what kind of dual sport conversion you're thinking about doing is the legality side of it. So I know a lot of times if you do have these old street bikes that have been hanging around in a farmer's field for 100 years, if you've got a dirt bike, obviously in West Virginia, they never issued titles for dirt bikes until I think 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. So it is hard, at least in West Virginia, to get these things to have a title and to get them where you can make them. We kind of talked about earlier. Obviously, part of that legality is having the lighting kit on the bike, and there's multiple options out there. Baja Designs used to make a lot of them, which I think they're kind of getting out of the motorsport stuff. Seems like these days, Tusk has their kit out that's pretty popular. There's 100 cheap Chinese Amazon knockoffs of those kits out there as well. But if you're starting out with a bike that doesn't have a title, that's a huge disadvantage. And there are some options out there. And one of the most popular ones back in the day, which unfortunately has closed now, was what they referred to as the Vermont loophole. And, you started seeing that around here a little bit in surrounding states where you'd see a bike with a green Vermont tag. And I was super curious about it myself years back. And I was like, how in the world is that? What does that mean? How does that work? And basically, the state of Vermont does not issue titles for vehicles that are over 25 years old or motorcycles that are under 1,250 cc's. What they issue is a plate and a registration card. And they also don't care if you were a resident of Vermont. All they wanted was the tax money to get the plate and the registration for the bike.
That sounds right.
What you would do is they had on their DMV website, they had an affidavit that you would print out. You would take it to a police station. They would run the VIN number on the vehicle to make sure it wasn't stolen. If it came back clean, they would sign off on that affidavit. You would mail in the affidavit signed by a police officer. You would include I think it was 5% sales tax of the total sale of the vehicle. And 2 or 3 weeks later, you were issued a Vermont license plate and a registration. And once you ran with that for a month or two, or I mean, you could keep renewing it yourself, but you'd start getting some prying eyes about why is this bike registered out of state that you're riding around here all the time. You simply take the plate and the registration to the West Virginia DMV and say, I'd like to get this transferred over to West Virginia plate and title. And they'd say, let me see your title. And you say, Vermont does not issue titles for motorcycles, whatever the statutes were. And they would look it up, see that you were correct. You would surrender your Vermont registration and tag, and they would give you a West Virginia title and a West Virginia tag for your vehicle. And that loophole closed because it was getting done so much that the powers that be looked into it and actually found out that there was a lot of shady stuff going on in the Vermont DMV as far as stolen motorcycles and stolen vehicles getting re-registered. And unfortunately, that loophole closed. But there's still one other one available if you want to go that route through another state, and that's South Dakota. South Dakota is still open, and it's basically the same exact process. So it's definitely something you can look into doing if you're interested that way. One of the other ways now is a company called Dirt to Legal, which I know you were talking about, Trevor, to me before, and it's a full-on company that takes care of all that paperwork and all that mess for you. Now, they do charge a pretty good penny to do that, but if you don't feel like going through that entire process, that is an option.
Well, sometimes it's a question of how much is your time worth? Do you want to sit and research this endlessly and look at 10-year-old forum threads that are dead and try to piece everything together for what you need to do, especially now that the Vermont loophole is closed and others aren't far behind. I haven't used the service personally. I looked into it at one point because I considered taking a KLX 300R and putting a street legal kit on it and going through Dirt to Legal. So I'm at least familiar enough with kind of the preliminary process that, it seems like it's a well put together service. The downside is the cost.
Yeah, they not only do they do motorcycles, they do side-by-sides where it's legal in your state. And I know they were really big for the Japanese key trucks, getting those things registered and legal too. So, you look online, they have great reviews. They're pretty quick turnaround. But I know I looked into it one time. I think, Dad, when we had the TT 350 Yamaha down there in the building, I was looking at trying to get it legal through Dirt to Legal, and I think everything's said and done, it was almost $300 through them to do it. But I mean, if your time's worth that much, you don't have to touch anything. You just pay them and they'll take care of it for you. Let's see, one last thing, which luckily we've been able to be a part of with the Country Roads Coalition, was getting the special purpose vehicle registration passed here in West Virginia, and that's a super awesome way to get stuff like dirt bikes have been sitting around for 100 years with no title legal and registered in the state of West Virginia. And I know, like we talked about earlier, Mike Heston was one of the first guys we knew around in our group that was able to get a two-stroke street legal. And basically all it is now is you take there's a form from the West Virginia DMV, and I can't remember the exact form number. It's on their website. You take that form and your motorcycle to a enhanced inspection station, and there's a list on the DMV website that shows all the different ones throughout the state. And basically they just look over your bike, make sure it's not stolen, make sure you got, some type of Dualsport street legal lighting kit on it. They sign off on the paperwork. You take it back to the DMV, give that to them. They issue a West Virginia title and a motorcycle plate. And that also goes for motorcycles that if you do have a title, like a newer one these days that say off-road only on the title, it doesn't say motorcycle, that also lets you convert that off-road only title to a motorcycle title.
Nice.
Well, your XR650R was titled several years ago because I knew the gentleman that had it, and he also owned a car lot, and it took him, I think he said 6 or 7 tries of mixing that dirt title in with car titles he was taken to the DMV before they actually slipped it through. But once you get it, then they can't take it from you. Yeah. That's how it used to be.
I know there was a little bit of discrepancy there too when that SPV registration first came out. The DMV looked at that as, hey, this is a quick way for us to get some money and revenue into the system. So unfortunately, all these old farmers and trail guys that had a bike they bought back in 1984 from whatever dealership that's closed 100 years ago, they were getting registration paperwork in the mail saying, hey, it's time to renew the registration on your 250 Foreman that's it's from 1994.
So, that they bought with a certificate of origin. It was never titled.
It was never titled. So there was a little bit of a hiccup there for a while, but luckily we got Mark Maynard on our side and was able to take care of that where it was optional. because the way that the letters read, it was mandatory that you had to get these things.
Yeah, you have to do this. I remember that.
Yeah. So luckily that was taken care of. And, of course, West Virginia is going to look out for themselves and try to figure out a way to make the most money they can from you from the DMV, especially these days.
Absolutely.
Let me see. I think that about covers all my notes. You guys got anything else to add about either street bikes or dirt bikes, getting them legal?
Yeah, another pitfall of going from street to dirt is aluminum, like cast aluminum wheels as opposed to spoked. That tubeless as opposed to tubed. Some of us aren't quite sold on the whole tubeless tire thing for off-road, and that's kind of another consideration too. The cast wheels just can't quite hold up to the same amount of abuse in a lot of cases as spoked wheels, and naturally you don't break a couple spokes that you can then replace in your garage. You bend that thing and have to start trying to source a new one.
Yeah. I will say from personal experience, Kawasaki did a good job on these Versus cast wheels because I beat the piss out of them. They've held up.
Well, I can say the same thing about the old GS wheels because I converted them. I run tubes in them, and they should be broken. I'll put it that way, but they're not.
That's what that.
I think that kind of boils down to also if you're on a converted street bike with cast wheels, most people aren't going to push that thing hard enough to hurt the wheel. Yeah,
you're already.
There's going to be other issues come up before you. But if you're somebody that really likes to test the limits of the design, I'm sure you can find it. I'm sure you can find the limit.
If for those of you that know me and you're watching now, you see where I get all of my crazy hoonigan riding stuff you shouldn't off-road skills from.
No, I would never do that.
Not a pillar.
I believe that everyone should have 100 horsepower Dualsport. At least one, maybe more than that.
Mandatory.
All right. Well, I think that that covers all of the topic for tonight's episode there. So we'll get into a little bit of industry news here first before we get into everybody's favorite segment, which is the world famous Had to Lay Her Down. So here's some of the industry news, and the first one's kind of interesting, and I think both of you guys will appreciate this. It's super expensive, but it is a really cool thought process. More power, baby. Tomoson R&D is offering a CR500 repower kit for your new model CRF 450. Now, the kit allows you to keep the bottom end cases, the clutch, and the gearbox and starter off the 454 stroke, and it comes with a new outer cover or side cases, cylinder, new crankshaft, and basically it allows you to keep the frame geometry of the 4-stroke with a 2-stroke engine, which I think is pretty interesting. You don't have to cut up an aluminum frame and modify it to fit the 2-stroke motor. They actually modify the engine to fit the 4-stroke chassis. Unfortunately, it's $9,000. So
yeah.
I'll tell you what, Bill, we can go in 50-50 and split custody.
Did you guys see the video of the V4 CR500?
Yes, yeah, I did see
that.
My question is why, but I really love the sound of it.
Backcountry Discovery Routes, BDR, they're offering a Ducati Desert X as a raffle prize to help with some of the fundraising to continue their project. And the thing is completely kitted out with Tortec suspension, crash bars, basically everything that you can get for the new Ducati Desert X is available for that bike. And entries are $25, and it's available on their website, which is ridebdr.com. And you can go on there, submit your information, and enter a chance to win a Desert X. The only thing it's missing that I saw was some sweet Marlboro or Lucky Strike graphics on the side of it to look like an old car bike.
That was such a cool era for bikes. All the cigarette company sponsored rally bikes.
Me and my buddy Justin at work were talking about that the other day. That I looked it up. You had a awesome photo of the Camel World Rally team, and Camel logo, cigarette logo right on the side of it. You had Land Rovers, you had the big, huge, I don't know what you call them, the IVEC trucks, the giant, like 6-wheeled, horrible, huge, heavy trucks. And you had a couple of the DR 800, the big bore DRs there, sitting with the Camel graphics on there as well.
They'll never let anything be that cool ever again.
No, they won't.
They won't have.
And the last part of the industry news, a little bit of sad news to report. And I actually, this is one of the founders of a company that was very customer oriented, because he would answer every question you sent you and try to build you a custom wheel set, especially if you're talking about Dualsport conversions. TG Woody White of Woody Wheel Works passed away yesterday. He was a longstanding member of the adventure community and one heck of a wheel builder, and we say rest in peace to him. I know, especially with my Versa 650, he was the only guy that was out there manufacturing aftermarket spoked wheels to fit the Versa 650. Basically, if you called that guy up, you had an idea to convert a street bike into a dirt bike, and there was more than 5 or 6 people that wanted to do the same thing. He would build you a set of wheels and sell them to everybody. So definitely an icon that we lost in the industry there.
We're running out of wheel builders, period. It's getting more difficult to find a service that can lace up, a new hub or something like that.
I saw that Han Wheels is going out of business too. So yeah, you're definitely right, man. It's pretty much going to be Tusk Impact or Excel. You're not going to have any choices out there.
KKEs.
Ah, yeah.
Well, if you need wheels laced up, that all you need is a handful of spokes, rim, and a hub, and give them to Angie Wright or Taylor Wright, either one. They can lace them up for you. They're the only ones I know with enough patience to do it.
Well, with that being said, let's get into everybody's favorite part of the show. Had to lay her down.
Did you run into some clippings? Did Barb take the kids? Well, Hoss, maybe you had to lay her down.
Everybody loves Clibbins Corner.
It never gets old.
So tonight's Had to Lay Her Down is one that was popular there a month or two ago. And I'm not sure where this is. It's overseas somewhere. And it just goes to show you that just because you think you can, a lot of times means you shouldn't. What we got here is a giant BMW. I assume it's like a 1200 GS with huge pannier racks on the side. And it's trying to go around this fallen boulder on some cliffside. And it doesn't turn out very well.
If you play that in reverse, it looks like a run at the Adler Hill climb.
Well, just to tell you the truth, I have bumped my 50 caliber boxes on a few things, riding, and it hasn't been catastrophic, but it will scare you a little bit. And I always think of that video every time it happens.
Yeah. I was able to do some research. That guy was okay. He just kind of slid about halfway down that mountain and got stopped. They were able to get him back up. Bike totaled.
The bike went to live on a farm upstate.
Went to the mouse circus.
Yep. So what would we call that? Is that boulder clippings? Is that pannier?
Man, that's just a good case of, yeah, it sucks to take some of those panniers off, but for something like that, that could have saved your entire trip, 10, 15 minutes with a ratchet. If you've got one of the ones that aren't easily detachable, could have saved your entire day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it pays to stop and think.
Yeah. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us tonight. Dad, thanks for coming on. And
no problem. Thank you.
We appreciate you coming on here tonight. Trevor, thanks as always for everything. And thanks everybody to you for tuning in. Let's one last thing. Let's go through some comments. I did
comments.
Yeah, I did forget that. Tom King says, "You're welcome." I think he's referring to you picking up the GS from him, Dad.
Yes, thank you, Tom.
I did see this one earlier, which is really funny. This is Alan Snyder. He's a guy I sold the XR650R to, and he says, "I will agree that your 650R wiring was a mess." Roger Hupp from YouTube. Hey, Roger. He says when he was riding a 300 XCW on Dualsport rides, he had a little screw cap valve that would hold enough oil for 75 to 80 to 1. So ran Amsoil Sabre, ran that setup from brand new to 250 hours, no hiccups. That's good to know. Let's see. I think there's one more here, which I'll have to look on my phone to see who commented this because it's not popping up. But they say, I have access to an abandoned 2004 Suzuki GS 500. Is that viable? That's Greg Blakey, actually. Hey, Greg. Yeah, man. I would say
definitely viable.
You know, like we talked about, I'm sure that there's some set of forks and a shock if you want to go that far to convert it over to, depending on what kind of wheels you have on there. I'm sure there's tires you can throw on there, and you know, what's our family motto, Dad? If it's free, if it's for me. So
yeah.
Thing for next time.
And actually, a little tidbit of information I did find out the other day. I believe it's Continental Tires are actually making. It's not a 50-50 tire, but it's more aggressive than a street tire. But a 15-inch rear. You know, all those old Jap bikes that are saddled with a 15-inch rear wheel. And they're actually, I think maybe the manufacturers are paying attention to what's going on.
It's always good to have options out there. So yeah, Greg, I'd say that's absolutely viable, man. Whatever you can get it for, get it cheap, get it next to nothing. You know, what's the harm in taking it on an adventure? You know, especially if you get it into it cheap enough, you're not really going to care if you tear it up a little bit.
There you go.
Appreciate everybody coming on, and we'll catch you next Tuesday night. And thanks for tuning in. Appreciate y'all.
Yep. Have a good one.
See y'all.